She was formerly a senator out of California. She, of course, came under a lot of criticism from the Trump campaign and the Republicans broadly for how she's handling, or at least viewing and talking about the border crisis, which is a hot topic issue in the states. What credibility does she have on that front?
Well, this is going to be a challenge for America in the years and decades ahead. President Biden is an outlier. He's probably the leader with the most foreign policy experience. And that just simply isn't reflected in any of the other potential candidates. Kamala Harris does carry the baggage of having been assigned the portfolio of dealing with the southern border as really her first challenge when she became vice president, and it didn't go well. And undoubtedly, at a time when Trump has decided to make immigration his #1 calling card after the economy, they will double down on attacking Vice President Kamala Harris for her record. But she's also associated with an effort, along with President Biden, to pass spending to deal with the border that we know Donald Trump blocked from behind the scenes. And she will have to articulate her policy and her vision for how she's going to deal with a real problem, but also how she's going to manage the very toxic politics that are going to surround this campaign. And as we know, immigration and immigration policy is a concern, especially in the United States. It's a concern across Europe. Europeans will be looking to see whether they have potentially a good ally and partner when it comes to questions of managing the rallying cry from the far right to close off borders, or whether there can be a pragmatic, sensible, realistic set of policies for dealing with the southern border. And we haven't seen that to date, partly because it's just simply very, very difficult to work Congress. And we are all very focused on the headline race in November,
Yeah.
but there are lots of races that are up for grabs in the Senate and in the House, and that will matter for immigration policy.
It absolutely will. And Leslie, let's talk then about, and I think for an international audience, really want to know what the odds are of this kind of potential ticket swap if indeed Kamala Harris does get the Democratic nomination and is going head to head with President Trump, which, of course, we're still waiting for that virtual roll call and then the Democratic convention to follow to solidify that. Leslie, I'm curious what the odds actually are here. Look, she is not only running as a woman, but as a woman of color, of both Black and South Asian descent. She's been a first in many of the roles that she's taken on, the very first senator of South Asian descent in American history. But when you look at the polling odds, she doesn't have that much of an advantage over President Biden when it comes to President Trump. Does that change by November in your point of view?
Well, first of all, if Kamala Harris was running against a normal, ordinary, centrist Republican, I would be very skeptical about her prospects. But she isn't. She's running against former President Donald Trump, who is an intensely polarizing figure, who has chosen a running mate who doubles down on an agenda that is very polarizing, that relies on the promise of tax cuts and deregulation to get otherwise a very significant group of wealthy Americans who would be very reluctant to support what is an agenda that has some very polarizing elements. And whether he can credibly signal that, remains to be seen. But Kamala Harris, in this context, in an America in which we're seeing an extraordinary demographic change, young voters that want a reason to turn out, that are much more diverse, that care about climate change. Donald Trump and his running mate have rejected the climate agenda. They're in the wrong position on Israel and Palestine. So there are a lot of things for Kamala Harris to play for. And as you've suggested, we just have to wait and see. She may stumble. More likely, she will not stumble because she's going to have so much energy around her. The one thing that unites the Democrats is their intense desire to defeat former President Donald Trump. We saw this in the last presidential election. That's why they consolidated around President Biden after South Carolina.
Yeah.
And I imagine we will see this again.